My name is Liana Al-Zahiri, and by birth I belong to the inner circle of the House of Saud. From the outside, my life looked like a dream few could even imagine. I grew up inside palaces where marble floors shone like still water, and crystal chandeliers hung above my head like captured stars. I never knew what it meant to lack anything material. If I pointed at something, it appeared. If I desired an experience, it was organized. But inside, I carried a silence that wealth could not drown. As a child, I learned quickly how to smile for photographs and guests. The obedient daughter, the modest princess, the symbol of tradition in designer abayas sewn in Paris. I was praised for my poise, my grades, my Quran recitation. Yet at night, in my own wing of the palace, I would stare at the carved ceiling and feel a cold emptiness pressing on my chest. In our home, Islam was not just a religion, it was the atmosphere we breathed. 5 daily prayers, Quran lessons, lectures from respected sheikhs. From my earliest memories, I was told who Allah was, who I was, and what my future must look like. Obedience meant honor and security. Questioning meant shame. I played my role perfectly. At family gatherings, I lowered my gaze and poured Arabic coffee with steady hands. At state dinners, I sat behind the woman's screen, veiled and composed. Servants adjusted my veil, stylists fixed my hair, bodyguards followed me like shadows. Everyone saw a privileged princess, wrapped in luxury and certainty. But when the doors finally closed and the servants left, I would walk barefoot across those same polished floors and whisper into the darkness, "Is this all there is? Is anyone really listening?" I did not know yet that the one who heard those words was not the God I had been taught to fear, but the one I had never been allowed to truly know.
In our family, religion was discipline before it was comfort. I remember my father standing at the head of our private prayer room, his voice deep and steady as he recited Quran. I remember the sharp edge of his expectations more clearly than any verse. We were not just any Muslim family, we were an example, watched and measured by others. That weight sat on my small shoulders long before I understood its meaning. Prayer times dictated the rhythm of our days. If a royal event overlapped with Maghrib or Isha, the event bent, not the prayer. At 12 years old, I was already memorizing long passages of Quran and studying fiqh with tutors. I learned the rules of purity, the requirements for modesty, the correct way for a woman to walk, speak, and sit. My father would look at me with pride when I answered religious questions correctly in front of guests. "She will be a strong Muslim woman," he would say. I smiled, but inside his words felt like a sentence, not a blessing. The teachings about women cut deepest. We were honored, they said, but with boundaries. We were precious, they said, but protected by walls. Marriage was spoken of as duty before joy. My future was drawn in lines I did not choose. Marry a man selected for politics and status, bear heirs, host gatherings, represent piety. When I asked why, questions rose in my chest whenever Allah was mentioned. My tutors warned me, "Whispers from Shaitan, ignore them." So I learned to silence myself, to push my doubts down where no one could see them. On the outside, I followed every rule. I wore the abaya, the niqab when required, the perfect smile. Inside, a quiet rebellion began, not against my father, not even against my country, but against a God who felt distant, demanding, and impossible to reach. I wanted to love God. Instead, I feared failing Him. Royalty in Saudi Arabia comes with something most people never see: invisible bars. I could travel wherever I wanted, but always with security. I could study whatever I wanted so long as it didn't threaten our values. I could meet anyone important as long as they were approved. Yet beyond our borders, another Liana existed. When I traveled to London, Paris, or Dubai, my world shifted. The abaya loosened, the veil came off. My cousins and I slipped into designer dresses and moved through hotel lobbies and private clubs where no one knew our titles, only our money. In those nights, I tried to outrun the emptiness. We drank what was forbidden. We laughed too loudly. We spent what others would earn in a lifetime in a single evening. Men surrounded us, businessmen, entertainers, heirs to foreign fortunes. They wanted proximity to power. We wanted to forget we were trapped by it. I told myself I was free in those moments. But every morning the truth crawled back. I would wake up with smudged eyeliner and a pounding head, staring at the ceiling of some penthouse suite. The same question always surfaced. Why do I still feel so empty? When I returned to Riyadh, the other Liana vanished. I stepped back into the cage. Prayer rooms, lectures, carefully arranged meetings with suitable men, endless reminders of duty. My mother would kiss my forehead and say, "Alhamdulillah, you are safe. The world outside is dangerous." She was right. It was dangerous. Not because of what I did there, but because outside that perfect Islamic structure, I caught glimpses of something terrifying. The possibility that life could be different, that I could be different. Yet even in the clubs and streets of Europe, God still felt far away. I tried sin, and I tried strict obedience, and somehow both left me in the same place, alone, with a hollow inside my chest that nothing could fill. The first time I saw a Bible, it was not in a church or in the hands of a missionary. It was in a luxury apartment in London, handed to me like a joke. We were hosting a small gathering, just a circle of princesses and daughters of ministers, all from the Gulf, all wearing clothes we would never dare to put on at home. Music played softly. An expensive bottle of champagne sat opened on the table. One of my friends, Amal, tossed a small, leather-bound book onto the couch beside me. "Look," she laughed. "This is what the Christians believe. I found it in the bookshop on Oxford Street. Maybe we can read it and make fun of it." I picked it up. The cover was worn, as if someone had touched it many times with care. The pages were thin, almost delicate. I knew enough from my Islamic studies. This book was supposed to be corrupted, changed by men, filled with lies. And yet, holding it, I felt curious. I flipped it open. My eyes fell on words about love, about forgiveness, about a shepherd who leaves 99 sheep to find the one that is lost. Another page spoke about a God who so loved the world that he gave his only son. I almost dropped the book when I read that. "Blasphemy," I muttered under my breath, feeling both offended and strangely drawn. "Read something," Amal urged. "Come on, make us laugh." So I did. I read a few verses aloud in a mocking tone. The others giggled. We treated it like entertainment, not revelation. We joked about Jesus the prophet being made into Jesus the God. We said the Christians were weak, always talking about love and forgiveness instead of law and strength. Yet as the night went on, I found myself returning to the same lines. A God who comes close, a God who calls himself Father, a God who gives himself up for people who do not deserve it. I put the Bible into my bag when no one was watching. I told myself it was only because I wanted more material to mock later. Deep down, something else had already begun. Back in my suite, overlooking the Thames, I could not sleep. The city hummed softly outside, lights shimmering on the surface of the river. My cousins had gone back to their rooms. The laughter had faded. The emptiness, however, remained. I took the Bible out of my designer bag and laid it on my lap. For a moment I hesitated. All my life, I had been told this book was dangerous, corrupted, misleading, but I had also been told many things that had never truly reached my heart. What harm could come from reading a few pages? I began in the Gospel of John, not because I knew its importance, but because it was where the book opened. In the beginning was the Word. The language felt different from the Quran, less strict, more intimate. There was a person at the center of this story, not just commands, a light shining in darkness, a word made flesh. I read about Jesus healing the sick, touching lepers, speaking to women no one else respected. I read about him calming storms, forgiving sins, weeping when his friend died. This was not the distant, unreachable judge I knew from my understanding of God. I felt something strange. I was jealous of the people in those stories. Jealous of the woman who touched his cloak and was healed. Jealous of the man on the cross beside him who heard, "Today, you will be with me in paradise." But then came the words that slammed into the core of my Islamic beliefs. I and the Father are one. No one comes to the Father except through me. I closed the book sharply, heart racing. If what this book said was true, then everything I had been taught about God was incomplete or wrong. If it was false, then even reading it was a sin. I hid the Bible in the lining of my suitcase. The next day, I found myself thinking more about Jesus than about my shopping list. In the car, on the plane, in my room, back in Riyadh, his words followed me. I did not know it yet, but the most dangerous act I had ever committed was not breaking a Saudi law. It was daring to ask, quietly and honestly, "Allah, God, whoever you truly are, show me the truth." Back in the kingdom, my life resumed its carefully choreographed rhythm. Security details, family meetings, Quran recitations, weddings and engagements of relatives. From the outside, nothing had changed. But inside, a quiet storm was gathering. At night, I would lock my bedroom door and take the Bible out from its hiding place behind a row of religious books. I read slowly, always listening for footsteps in the hallway. Verses began to etch themselves into my memory before I realized I was memorizing them. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." I read that line again and again, feeling as if someone were speaking directly into the hollow space inside my chest. But secrets rarely stay hidden forever in a palace. One evening, a young maid entered my room unexpectedly to bring tea. I was too slow. By the time I snapped the Bible shut and covered it with a notebook, she had already seen the unfamiliar pages. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second before she looked away, murmured an apology, and left. I told myself I was being paranoid. Servants were trained never to comment, never to question. But days later, I noticed two of my aunts watching me more closely. A cousin asked casually, "What have you been reading late at night, Liana? You look tired." One afternoon, as I rearranged the books on my shelf, a single Bible page slipped loose, fluttered to the carpet, and slid partially under the door. My heart froze. I lunged forward, but at that exact moment, someone walked past in the hallway. I saw the shadow pause. Then, a hand picked up the paper from the other side. There was silence. Then a knock. My older brother stepped in, the page between his fingers. His eyes moved from the paper to my face, then to the shelves behind me. "Where did this come from?" he asked, voice low. Time seemed to halt. I considered lying. I considered laughing it off. Instead, I froze. That was answer enough. He closed the door behind him, slid the page into his pocket, and said only 3 words. "Baba will know." It is Noe. I knew then that my secret was no longer mine alone. My father did not shout. That made it worse. He called me to his private office, a place where decisions about contracts, alliances, and lives were made. The air smelled of oud and paper. On his desk lay the Bible page my brother had found, weighted down by a golden pen. "Sit," he said. I obeyed. He looked older than usual, deep lines carved into his forehead. "What is this, Liana? A page someone must have? Do not insult my intelligence." His voice was still calm, but his eyes were fire. "You know what this is. You know what it means in this house, in this country, for a daughter of mine to secretly read the book of the Christians." He asked me questions in a measured, deliberate way. "Who gave you this? Do you deny reading it? Have you spoken to any foreigners about religion? Have you rejected Islam in your heart?" I denied more than I admitted, but the truth clung to me like the scent of smoke. He could smell it. My hesitation, my half answers, my refusal to curse the Bible outright, all of it betrayed me. Within days, the Committee for the Promotion of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice, the religious police became involved. Not formally at first. Men began to appear around the edges of our gatherings, watching. A scholar my father trusted visited, asking pastoral questions that sounded more like an investigation. In Saudi Arabia, believing in another prophet is ignorant. Turning away from Islam is criminal. One night, I was taken not to a public office, but to a quiet compound on the outskirts of Riyadh. Inside, I sat in a room with 2 religious officials and a government representative. There were no cameras that I could see, only a Quran on the table and a recorder with a red light. They spoke of concern at first. "People are saying strange things, Princess. We know you would never dishonor your family." But every time I hesitated to condemn the Bible, every time Jesus' name stayed on my tongue instead of the safe Islamic titles, the temperature in the room dropped. Finally, one of the men asked bluntly, "Have you read the Injil and believed anything in it about Isa being more than a prophet?" I thought of the words, "Whoever denies me before men, I will deny before my Father." My throat burned. I have read it," I whispered, "and I cannot say it is all lies." In that moment, I watched their expressions harden. I did not fully understand it yet, but with that quiet sentence, I had crossed a line that the law did not forgive. Rumors in palaces move silently but quickly. Within a week, I went from being the daughter who survived a difficult season to the princess whose faith is in question. My parents tried first to contain it. Private scholars came to our home, tasked with correcting my understanding. A gentle old sheikh spoke to me for hours about the perfection of the Quran, the preservation of Islam, the supposed contradictions of the Bible. He reminded me of the legal consequences of doubt. "Question, but do not cross the red line," he warned. "Apostasy is death." But something had shifted inside me. Every attempt to pull me back made the words of Jesus ring louder in my memory. He did not threaten me. When I refused to publicly renounce ever reading the Bible, the matter moved from family trouble to state concern. I was summoned before a panel of religious judges in a closed session. They read out the accusations: possession of prohibited religious material, reading the Injil with respect rather than rejection, expressing sympathy for Christian beliefs, refusing to declare that the Bible is wholly false. "Do you deny these claims?" they asked. I could have lied. I could have wept and said I was confused, that Satan had whispered to me, that I repented and returned fully to Islam. My life, my status, my safety, all of it hung on my tongue. Instead, words came that surprised even me. "I have found in that book something I did not find anywhere else: peace. I cannot call it evil." The room went still. A judge adjusted his glasses, studying me as if I were some strange creature. Another shook his head almost sadly. "Princess Liana," the senior judge said slowly, "do you understand that under Sharia, turning away from Islam and embracing the beliefs of the Christians is punishable by death?" My hands trembled, but my voice did not. "I understand," I said, "but I will not lie to please you. Something in my heart has changed." They ended the session. Weeks later, the official documentation would use one word that changed everything: Ridda, apostasy. In a nation where law and faith are intertwined, that word is not just spiritual, it is legal, and the punishment written beside it is clear. The verdict did not come in a grand courtroom with cameras and spectators. It came in a narrow office, presented as if it were just another document for my father to sign. I was not supposed to see it, but that day he left it face down on his desk when he stormed out to shout at one of the ministers on the phone. I turned the paper over with shaking hands. There it was, in formal Arabic, stamped and sealed: evidence of apostasy, rebellion against the religion of the state, refusal to recant. And then, the line that made the room spin: "The court therefore rules that the prescribed punishment is to be applied." I did not need anyone to explain what that meant. I had grown up hearing whispers of cases where men and women who left Islam were executed quietly, far from cameras, but executed nonetheless. Beheading, sometimes, or other means hidden behind official language. My father returned and saw the paper in my hands. For a moment, his mask of control cracked. "You left me no choice," he said hoarsely. "I tried to protect you. I tried to keep this within the family, but you would not listen." "Baba," I whispered. "I was only reading. I just wanted to know." "You wanted to know?" he snapped. "Your curiosity has become rebellion. Do you realize what they could do not only to you, but to us? Our name? Our position?" He turned away, shoulders heaving. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "There is still time," he said. "If you recant, publicly, completely, they will soften. You will be sent away quietly, perhaps. Married off, watched, but alive." The judges gave me one more official opportunity to deny what they believed I had become. I stood before them, heart pounding, palms slick with sweat. "Do you reject the false beliefs of the Christians and affirm that there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger?" I could feel my father's eyes on my back. I thought of my mother, my siblings, my life of comfort. Then I thought of the one who said, "Whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life, for my sake, will find it." "I believe there is only one God," I said slowly, "but I have come to know Jesus in a way I cannot deny. If that makes me guilty in your eyes, then I am guilty." The room exhaled a mix of disbelief and resignation. The verdict stood. I, a Saudi princess, was now sentenced to death for reading and believing words I had once been told were nothing but lies. Royalty did not keep me from a prison cell. It only meant my cell was cleaner and more hidden. They took me in an unmarked car at dawn, long before the city fully woke. No convoy, no public spectacle, just a quiet transfer from palace walls to razor wire. My abaya and veil remained. My title did not. The cell was small, with a narrow bed, a thin blanket. For the first time in my life, I had more iron around me than marble. At first, I tried to pray the way I had always been taught. I laid the small prison mat on the floor and faced the Qibla. I recited the opening chapter of the Quran, the verses of protection, the words I had memorized since childhood, but they fell flat. My tongue moved. My heart did not. Finally, I sat back on the bed and whispered into the silence, "Jesus, if you are real, if what I read about you is true, then you know where I am. You know what they plan to do to me. I don't even know if I'm allowed to speak to you, but I have nothing left to lose." The days blurred together. Guards brought food without speaking. Sometimes I heard distant echoes of other prisoners, shouts, sobs, prayers. I had a Quran in my cell, but each time I opened it, I found myself thinking of the Bible I no longer had. The stories of Jesus, the way he spoke to the broken, the trapped, the guilty. Fear crawled through me at night like insects. I imagined the moment they would come for me. The sound of footsteps, the order given, the cold realization that no money, no influence, no title could stop what was written. And yet, beneath the terror, a strange seed of peace had been planted. I remembered his words, "I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep." In that cell, I realized something. For all my life, I had been willing to obey God in order to avoid punishment. For the first time, I found myself willing to risk punishment in order to stay true to the one who had touched my heart. I did not know it yet, but the darkest night of my life was about to become the brightest. It happened on a night when fear sat heaviest on my chest. The air in the cell felt thick. Sweat clung to my skin despite the air conditioning. I could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the cold, official words of the verdict. I slid off the bed and knelt on the concrete floor. Not in the prescribed Islamic posture, but simply as a desperate woman with nowhere else to go. "Jesus," I whispered, "if I am wrong, let me die quickly. If you are only a prophet, let Allah judge me. But if you are who that book says you are, if you truly are the Son of God, the Savior, then I need you. I am about to die for even daring to believe you might be more than a story." I expected silence. Instead, the cell grew brighter. It wasn't the harsh white of fluorescent light. It was a warm, living brightness, as if the air itself had turned to gold. My body stilled. I thought I was losing my mind from stress, hallucinating. But then, in the middle of that small room, I became aware of a presence. I cannot explain how I recognized him. He did not introduce himself with titles. He did not need to. In a single instant, I knew with a certainty deeper than any fear, this was Jesus. He did not look like the paintings from Western movies, but like a man of my region, dark hair, strong features, eyes that held oceans of sorrow and joy. His clothes were simple, but the glory around him made every royal garment I had ever worn look like dust. "Liana," he said. He knew my name. When he spoke, his voice went past my ears and into the deepest part of me. It carried authority and tenderness in equal measure. "You are not forgotten," he said. "You are not abandoned. You were never unseen to me, not in the palaces of your childhood, not in the parties, not in the nights of emptiness, not in this cell." Tears flooded my eyes. "I burned your words in my heart. I choked. I doubted you. I mocked you. And now I am here because I read about you. I don't even know how to pray to you correctly." He stepped closer. "I saw every moment," he replied. "I felt every wound you carried, every disappointment, every silent question. I have not come to condemn you, Liana. I have come to save you." In that cell, I understood something I had never grasped from any lecture, any sermon, any law. God was not far away. He had come close. "If I save your life," he said gently, "will you give it to me?" My fear did not vanish, but it was swallowed by something larger. Love. "Yes," I whispered. "If I live for you. If I die, let it be with your name on my lips." The light grew even brighter, and for a moment I felt chains I hadn't even known existed snap inside me. The crushing weight of earning acceptance, of performing perfection, of being enough, it all shattered. "Then do not be afraid," Jesus said. "They have written a sentence for your death. I have written another story." When the light faded, the cell was ordinary again. But I was not. I did not know when they would come. I only knew they would. Days later, how many? I cannot say I heard the sound I had feared. Heavy footsteps, multiple pairs, stopping in front of my cell. The key turned. The door opened. "Stand," a guard ordered. My legs felt like water, but I stood. They bound my wrists, not roughly but firmly, and led me out. The corridors smelled of cleaning chemicals and metal. I watched doors pass, each one holding a life, a story. Outside, the sun was blinding. They placed me into the back of a vehicle, flanked by 2 guards. No one spoke. The city moved around us, unaware or pretending not to notice. To the world, I was just another quiet vehicle in a long line of government cars. I thought of my family, my father, torn between love and reputation, my mother, who might never know exactly what day her daughter died, my siblings, who would be told something sanitized, maybe softened. But mostly I thought of the man who had stood in my cell. I whispered his name under my breath with each turn of the car. "Jesus! Jesus! Jesus!" We arrived at a secluded compound, not a public square. There would be no cameras, no crowds of strangers, only officials, a few witnesses, and the cold machinery of the state. They led me into a walled courtyard. At one end stood a place where sentences were carried out, simple, clinical, terrifying. A man in plain clothes stood nearby, the one whose task it would be to end my life. A religious official read from a document, reciting my alleged crimes. "Last chance," he said, almost mechanically. "Do you renounce any belief that contradicts Islam? Do you affirm that you were misguided and that you return now to the straight path? I could feel every cell in my body screaming for survival. But there was another voice now, deeper than my fear. I cannot lie, I said, my voice shaking but audible. I believe in the God of Abraham, and I have come to know his son, Jesus. If you must kill me for that, then do what you have decided. The official stared at me, stunned for a moment by the calm in my tone. He gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head, then signaled to the executioner. They led me forward. The world narrowed to the sound of my own breathing, the crunch of gravel under my shoes, the weight of the air. I thought my last words would be a scream. Instead, they were a prayer. Jesus, remember me, I whispered. Not because I am worthy, but because you said you would. What happened next would mark every day of my life afterward. The executioner raised his arm. Time seemed to slow, every sound stretching thin, the rustle of clothing, the distant hum of an air conditioner, the faint call to prayer floating from some far-off mosque. Then the ground shook. At first, I thought it was my imagination, the trembling of my own knees projected onto the earth. But the vibration grew stronger, rattling metal fixtures, shaking dust from the walls. A low, roaring sound rose, like thunder rolling beneath the soil. The executioner's arm faltered. The religious official looked around, alarmed. Guards reached for radios, speaking rapidly into them. The sky, moments before clear, darkened as a cloud of sand and dust swirled over the compound walls. It descended with unnatural speed, slamming into the courtyard like a living thing. The air turned thick. Visibility dropped to just a few meters. Guards shouted, coughing. Someone cursed. The executioner stumbled back, shielding his face. I could barely see my own hands. In the chaos, I heard a voice, not in my ears, but in the same place I had heard him before. I told you, Jesus said quietly. They have written their sentence. I have written mine. The sandstorm or whatever it was raged for what felt like minutes, but may have been only seconds. When it finally began to clear, we all stood coated in dust. The carefully arranged scene of state power had dissolved into confusion. A man in a suit ran into the courtyard, waving a folder. "Stop everything!" he shouted, breathless. "An order from above? Immediate suspension of the sentence. The case is to be reviewed. No one touches her." Everyone froze. The executioner lowered his arm completely, sweat and sand dripping from his face. The religious official stared at the document, reading the stamped signature over and over as if doubting his own eyes. Later, I would learn that at almost the exact moment the storm hit, a high-ranking royal had intervened, pressured by international whispers, internal politics, and a sudden, inexplicable sense that executing me would ignite a fire they were not ready to handle. They all had their explanations. Political strategy, timing, coincidence. But I knew what I had seen in my cell. I knew whom I had heard. The same Jesus who met me in the darkness had now stepped into the machinery of a kingdom to pull me back from the edge of death. They did not untie my wrists right away. But in that moment, I understood I was no longer walking to my execution. I was walking into a different kind of life. They did not release me back to my former freedom. They traded one kind of confinement for another. The official story, whispered among the elite, became, "Her case is complicated. For now, she is to be kept under watch, for her own good and for the country's stability." In practice, that meant house arrest in a private compound on the outskirts of Riyadh. High walls, security cameras, guards loyal to my father, a beautiful cage, but still a cage. Yet after the chill of the execution ground, even those walls felt like mercy. I had a bedroom, a sitting room, a small garden I could walk in under supervision. No official visitors unless approved. No phone, no internet at first. I was protected, they said. Protected from what? From the world? Or from the Jesus who had already found me even in a locked cell? The first night there, I lay awake listening to the quiet hum of the air conditioner, the distant sounds of traffic. My neck was still sore, where I had imagined the blade. My heart, however, pulsed with something new. I was alive, and I knew exactly why. Fear still visited me, fear of what they might do next, of sudden changes in orders, of being used as a pawn in games far above my understanding. But beneath the fear ran a deep, steady current of peace. "Lord," I whispered, "you saved me. I told you if I lived, I would live for you. I am trapped here, but I am yours. Show me what that means." Over the next weeks, subtle changes began. A trusted female relative brought me a tablet for reading. No social media, only news sites, books, and a monitored email account. She thought she was giving me something to relieve boredom. She did not realize she had handed me a doorway. Carefully, I searched. Quietly, I found online Bibles, testimonies of former Muslims who had met Jesus, sermons from pastors who spoke about grace instead of endless striving. I read until my eyes ached. The princess who had once burned holy words now devoured them. I copied verses by hand, hiding them in places guards would never think to look. I could not walk out of that compound, but within those walls, something unstoppable had begun. I was becoming, day by day, a follower of the one who had stepped between me and the sword. I had always known kings. I was born into their world, men whose words moved armies and oil markets, whose decisions shaped nations. I knew the weight of their expectations and the limits of their mercy. Now, in my confinement, I was learning to know a different kind of king. In the Gospels, I read about Jesus entering Jerusalem not on a war horse, but on a donkey. I read about him washing his disciples' feet instead of demanding that they wash his. I read about him standing silent before earthly rulers, not because he was weak, but because he knew his authority came from beyond their courts. This king did not send others to die for him. He died for them. I realized how deeply my view of God had been shaped by power structures. Obey or be crushed. Perform or be discarded. Love was conditional. Favor was fragile. But Jesus spoke of a father who ran toward prodigals, who left the 99, who loved while we were still far off. Sometimes I paced the small garden, repeating his words to myself under my breath. "I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. No one can snatch them out of my hand." I thought of the execution ground. They had almost snatched me away. The system, the law, the culture, everything had moved toward my death like a well-oiled machine. But he had stepped into its path. I began to understand. I had not merely been spared. I had been claimed. My prayers changed. I stopped begging God to let me go back to my old life. Instead, I asked Jesus to reshape my heart, to heal the wounds from years of fear and performance. The anxiety that had stalked me like a shadow slowly lost its grip. Nights became less haunted. Mornings began with gratitude instead of dread. I had lost my public identity, but I had gained a clearer, deeper one. I was now a daughter of the King of Kings, whose throne was not in Riyadh or in any palace on earth, but in a kingdom that could not be overthrown. I thought I was the only one, a single secret believer in a land where such belief could cost you your head. I was wrong. Through carefully coded conversations online and with one sympathetic foreign nurse assigned to check my health, I began to realize there was an underground church even here. Foreign workers, quiet Westerners, a few brave Saudis, ex-Muslims who met behind locked doors, in basements, in remote desert farms, to sing quietly and share bread and wine in memory of the one who had saved them. At first, I only heard about them. Then one evening, a car arrived at the compound with a female therapist from abroad, approved to help me handle the trauma of my case. She spoke gentle Arabic with an accent, and asked me about my fears, my dreams, my sleep. Then, when the guard stepped outside to take a phone call, she leaned closer and whispered in flawless, unaccented English, "Sister, you are not alone. We have been praying for a princess who loves Jesus." My heart nearly stopped. Tears rushed to my eyes so fast I could barely see. In the weeks that followed, Under the guise of therapy sessions, she shared with me stories of secret believers who risked everything to follow Christ. She told me names of countries where former Muslims had fled, churches where they had been welcomed. But more than anything, she gave me this assurance. Jesus has his people in every nation, yes, even in yours. You may never see many of them, but you are part of something bigger than your own cell, your own story. Eventually, through an intricate series of permissions and staged outings for mental health, I was allowed to attend one small secret gathering in a villa on the outskirts of the city. We arrived separately. We entered through side doors. Phones were collected. Inside, there were maybe 15 people. A Filipino maid, an Egyptian engineer, a Western consultant, 2 Ethiopian cleaners, a Pakistani driver, and me, a Saudi princess in a simple black abaya. We sang in whispers. We shared communion from a small cup and a piece of flat bread. For the first time in my life, I worshipped freely, not in a grand mosque with marble and gold, but in a hidden room where the only value was his presence. I was not the only secret in that room, but my presence there was proof of something. Jesus was not afraid of royal bloodlines, national borders, or religious systems. He was building his church in Saudi Arabia, one hidden heart at a time. Before my arrest, my royal status had been an identity and a shield. Now, it became a tool. Under house arrest, I still had access to certain resources. Discreet financial channels, old contacts, trusted staff. My movement was limited, but my influence, carefully used, was not. I began quietly funding ministries and safe houses outside the kingdom, places where former Muslims could flee if discovered. Through encrypted communication and trusted intermediaries, I helped pay for plane tickets, emergency housing, food, and legal aid. Each transfer felt like an act of worship. Each life helped felt like a small repayment toward the mercy I had received. Sometimes, the therapist turned sister would bring me stories. A young woman from the eastern province has arrived in Cyprus. She came to Jesus through a dream. Your help put her on that plane. A man who once persecuted Christians in another Gulf state is now in Europe, studying the Bible. Your funds paid for his visa. I would lie awake at night, not with the old anxiety, but with awe. The same money that once paid for parties and luxury now funded escape routes out of darkness. I also learned to advocate subtly inside the system. When reports of arrested foreign Christians crossed certain desks, I used my family name to raise quiet questions. This could affect our international image, I would say. Perhaps leniency would be wise. Officials thought I was doing damage control. They didn't know I was doing kingdom work. I was still watched. I still walked carefully. At any moment, the fragile protection around me could be withdrawn. But Jesus had not saved me, so I could spend the rest of my life merely surviving. He had spared me from the sword so I could lift him up even if most of the world would never know my name. My relationship with my family became a complex mixture of love, grief, and silence. My father rarely visited now. When he did, he spoke mostly of politics, of the economy, of reforms. Anything but the one subject that stood between us like an invisible wall. Sometimes I caught him looking at me with a mixture of sorrow and anger, a man who had nearly buried a daughter and still did not understand why she would risk her life over a faith he considered forbidden. My mother came more often. She brought food from the palace kitchens, stories of cousins' weddings, updates on my younger siblings. Pray more, she would urge me. Ask Allah for mercy. Perhaps He will give you another chance. I wanted so desperately to tell her, He already has, Mama. His name is Jesus. But to say those words openly would not only endanger me again, it would put them at risk. So I loved them the only way I could for now. Through quiet service, gentle words, prayers whispered when they left. One of my younger sisters surprised me one day by asking, "Do you still read that book?" I studied her face, searching for mockery or malice. Instead, I found curiosity. "I read online now," I said cautiously. "Why?" She hesitated, then shrugged too casually, just wondering why someone would almost die for a book. That's all. Later that night, I prayed for her by name, asking Jesus to meet her not through fear, but through love. Our house was divided, not by hatred, but by revelation. Some saw me as broken, some saw me as dangerous. None saw yet what I truly was, free. So I loved them, waited, and trusted that the same Jesus who had stepped into my cell and into my execution could step into their lives in his own time. In Saudi society, names are loaded. They carry lineage, honor, expectation. My full name tied me to generations of power, but in my secret times of prayer, another identity grew louder than any title or family connection. As I read the New Testament, phrases leaped off the screen: children of God, heirs with Christ, a royal priesthood. I had spent my whole life as an earthly princess, yet had never felt so truly royal as when I knelt on the floor of my small room, whispering, Abba, Father. There, in that hidden place, Jesus renamed me in ways no government could record. Not on a passport, not in a royal registry, but in the Lamb's Book of Life. I was still Liana al-Zahiri to the world. But heaven knew me as a daughter reclaimed. I began journaling my story, not for public release, but as an offering. I wrote about the palaces and the parties, the emptiness and the Bible, the cell and the sandstorm, the voice that called my name. I poured out my anger, my gratitude, my confusion, my awe. Sometimes I imagined other Muslim women reading it someday. Women in niqab who felt unseen, wives in gilded homes who went to bed with hearts full of questions, girls who had never met a Christian but had dreams they could not explain. To them I would say, I know what it is to fear God and yet feel far from Him. I know what it is to try to be perfect and still feel condemned. I also know what it is to meet a Savior who takes away the weight, instead of adding to it. Jesus did not erase my past. He redeemed it. Every tear I had ever cried, every lonely night in a palace, every moment on that execution ground, all of it now pointed, like arrows, toward the one who had stepped in. At first, every breath after the execution ground felt like borrowed time. I lived carefully, spoke cautiously, moved as if any wrong step would trigger an invisible trap. But over time, fear loosened its grip. Not because my situation became safer, it did not, but because my trust grew. I no longer woke up thinking, what if they come for me today? I woke up thinking, how can I honor Jesus with this day, however many I have left? Songs from underground worship gatherings lingered in my mind. Arabic hymns that spoke of grace, English choruses that spoke of freedom, whispered psalms that spoke of a shepherd who walks through valleys of shadow. I began to hum them while watering the plants in my small garden, while reading news on my tablet, while waiting between visits. I found myself praising more than pleading. Thank you that I am alive. Thank you that you met me. Thank you that even my house arrest cannot arrest your spirit. When I remembered the times I had mocked Christians, burned their book in my mind, or dismissed their faith as weakness, I felt a sharp sting of shame. But even that became an opportunity to praise. You saved me even when I hated you. You spared me not because I was good, but because you are. Slowly, my mind stopped circling around the injustice of my sentence and started circling around the mercy of my rescue. I had nearly been executed for reading the Bible. Now, every day I lived became another testimony to the one who had turned that death sentence into a doorway. I was no longer just surviving. I was worshipping in secret, in whispers, in everyday acts of obedience. My life, once defined by luxury and fear, began to be defined by something entirely new: gratitude. There are places where I can never show my face with this story. If my identity were fully known, it could cost lives, not just reputations. So Jesus led me to do something different, to speak without a face, to testify without a name the world could trace, while still telling the truth as clearly as possible. Through secure connections and trusted believers abroad, My written testimony began to move beyond the walls of my compound, first to a small house church in the Gulf, then to believers in Europe, then eventually into videos and articles shared online. They did not say, Princess Liana al-Zahiri. They said, a Saudi princess. That was enough. The point was never my identity anyway. The point was the one whose name I now loved to repeat. Sometimes I see comments relayed back to me. This story is impossible. No Saudi princess would ever become a Christian. God would never save someone who burned his book. Islam is perfect. This is Western propaganda. I understand. I said similar things once. And yet, mixed among the skepticism, there are other responses. I am a Muslim woman, and I have seen him in my dreams too. I thought I was the only one afraid of Judgment Day. Now I know someone else felt it. If Jesus can forgive a princess who nearly burned his words, maybe he can forgive me. Every time I hear such words, I close my eyes and whisper, thank you. In a world obsessed with faces and followers, Jesus has let me become something quieter, a voice telling of a kingdom that breaks into palaces and prisons alike. If you had seen me the day they led me to the execution ground, you would have seen a woman at the end of herself, a Muslim-born princess, condemned for reading a forbidden book, about to die in secret so the world would never question the system that killed her. Instead, I stand still hidden, still watched, but alive. Not just breathing, but reborn. I did not save myself. My family did not save me. Politics did not save me. Jesus stepped in. He stepped into the emptiness of a little girl who grew up in palaces. He stepped into the hypocrisy of my double life abroad. He stepped into my mind as I read the Bible. He stepped into my cell when no one else could reach me. He stepped onto that execution ground with a storm and an order of reprieve. Since that day, my life has taken a turn I never imagined. I live more simply. I am less free in the eyes of my country. Yet, I have a freedom now that no law, no decree, no sentence can touch. I belong to Christ. I no longer wake up wondering whether I have done enough to earn God's favor. I wake up knowing His favor was given to me at the cross, sealed at the empty tomb, and confirmed in a sand-choked courtyard where death lost its grip. I do not hate my people or my culture. I do not wish shame on my family. I pray for them. I love them. And I long for the day when they too will see the face of the one who met me in my cell. If you are reading this Muslim, Christian, uncertain, or nothing, I want you to know this. No amount of sin can put you beyond His reach. No level of status can make you too important for His love. No prison, no verdict. No nation's law can keep Him from stepping in when you call His name. My name is Liana. I was once a Saudi princess sentenced to die for reading the Bible. Now I am a daughter of the King of Kings, eternally alive, and my heart will never stop praising the Christ who saved me.